And today I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Jussie. Uh, the Hodge twins have a funny way of pronouncing his name. It sounds a lot more amusing coming out of their mouths. But I just want to talk about the Jussie Smollett debacle. And there are 100 different angles with which you could approach this story. I mean, it seems tailor made for the clown world in which which we inhabit right now. Uh, but there are a lot of different angles you could use to approach this. But one of them, and this is perhaps one of the most important ones, is the idea that someone who tried to start a race war literally tried to do the same thing that Charles Manson did, sans the murdered celebrities and actually killing people. And he tried to do the same thing that Charles Manson did, start a race war. Someone who tried to do that, who spent over a week just impugning and lying about white people and try to gin up hatred of white people, and in the process committed mail fraud and misused hundreds of thousands of dollars in police resources, simply committed numerous crimes, is now being let off with a small bribe to the Chicago police department, or the state's attorneys. Basically $10,000. They confiscated his bond, which is essentially a bribe, and I'll get to that a little bit later. But he's essentially being let off scot-free with a small bribe and and performing some quote unquote community service. And the community service he performed was hanging out in Jesse Jackson's push office in Chicago. Jesse Jackson is a kingmaker in Chicago politics. People don't understand the extent of power that he and Louis Farrakhan wield, despite being inveterate racists, liars. In the case of Louis Farrakhan, someone who literally conspired to assassinate another individual, they still wield enormous power, so much power that they're able to shield their associations with other people. In the case of Farrakhan, the fact that Barack Obama hugged him and smiled and has a picture of this that was embargoed by the photographer. Now, maybe there was a legitimate reason to do that for in order to protect his safety. We really don't know, but it was basically embargoed by that photographer and by the media until Barack Obama was out of office. Now, he performs community service by hanging around Jesse Jackson's push office and basically kibitzing with all of the other people that worked for his fraudulent organization and worked for that gigantic grifter. And that was his community service, and his $10,000 bond he got off. He got off after trying to start a literal race war. So whenever someone tries to guilt you, or anytime you hear white privilege invoked, this completely mythical, non-existent privilege supposedly white people are endowed with from birth, anytime you hear that, you just laugh in their face and point to this story where a gay, black, deranged anti-Trumper committed a transparently fake hate crime. Like 90% of the hate hoaxes that we hear about in the news that don't involve actual that are not really confirmable immediately. In other words, like the backwards swastika graffiti or the swastika daubed in poo and excrement on someone's house. The two white red MAGA hat wearing gangsters who assaulted a black gay man actor on Empire as he went to get a subway in the middle of the night in downtown Chicago. All of these are hoaxes. You can automatically, the default reaction for a normal rational person should be that these are hoaxes. And anytime white privilege is invoked, you need to point to this example and laugh in that person's face. So, I mean, that's one element that needs to be critically examined, and that the press, of course, is overlooking for the most part. The idea that that this guy knew that with the pervasive demonization of white men, especially white Christian and white heterosexual men, they are public enemy number one in this country. And you can level any sort of slander or any sort of libel, no matter how tenuous this accusation is, no matter how tenuous the connection of this accusation is to reality, no matter how absurd it is on its face, you can level any sort of accusation and the media will embrace it and run with it and turn you into a living martyr. And that's something people have to keep in mind whenever a hoax, not hate incident like this comes up. And we really need to examine why anyone gives any credibility to journalists, to mainstream journalists, people at CNN and CBS, and these lie factories. Why do we give their skewed, warped perception of reality any time of day? So, I mean, that's one issue. And as I said earlier, that another huge issue, which is kind of being examined, but not really, is the endemic systemic corruption of the state of Illinois and particularly the city of Chicago. You know, as I said, any city whose politics to a large extent is controlled by people like Louis Farrakhan or Jesse Jackson, just complete sociopaths who have no compunction about lying and deceiving and stoking racial hatred. Any city that's controlled by those people, to say nothing of the traditional aldermanic corruption and the daily machine, it's just a kind of like a festering ooze of corruption. And for people in New York, I think we can relate to a certain degree, because New York is also one of the most corrupt, in terms of its politics, is one of the most corrupt fever swamps. But Chicago is a little bit different. And you can see it by how Jussie Smollett was treated, how someone who had connections to Jesse Jackson, who had connections to Michelle Obama and the Obamas, who are also now a huge tentpole in the politics of Chicago and the politics of Illinois, how someone who had these connections and was able to trade on them was rewarded for his deceit, and will probably continue to do things maybe not as outrageous as this particular case, but will continue because he hasn't been chastened, he hasn't been chastised. He'll continue to exploit the system, the corrupt system as it exists now, for his own benefit. And this is something that I would recommend. And I've done a couple of reviews of David Garrow's masterful biography of Barack Obama. It's over 1,000 pages long. It's very long. It's heavily annotated. There are about, I would say, excuse me, there are about 300 pages just of endnotes. So it's a very intense read. It actually could have been edited. And actually, a lot of it could have been edited, but it's still worth reading, in my opinion, because it gives you an insight into the inner machinations of the Chicago, how the Chicago system works. And it's not just the political system, it's the law enforcement system. As you can see in this case, the district attorney was who was recipient of a huge donation from George Soros. She essentially came to an agreement with Jussie Smollett to avoid prosecuting him for something that he was guilty of, demonstrably guilty of. They had all of the evidence tied to the two brothers who helped him to stage this. So it's not just the political system, it's the judicial system, the law enforcement system. It's all kind of tied in to an edifice that's rotting from the inside. Where I joked about this on Facebook the other day, that there should be a Chicago-based spin-off of Law and Order where where justice is never rendered, and at the end of each episode, there's a large cash payoff to the DA. So, I mean, that would be the perfect Law and Order. They would never catch the perp. The guilty would never be punished, and the transgression would never be addressed. But a bunch of people would have their palms greased. And I mean, that's basically the moral of the story. You have a city and a county, and to a large extent, a country that is just, that doesn't understand what and doesn't really want to understand what the truth is, doesn't really want to address the real issues that are destroying and undermining society. So they invent things to latch on to nurse their own grievances, and when it comes time to actually rendering justice, you have essentially, no pun intended, a whitewash, and that's what this whole Jussie Smollett thing is. I mean, hopefully he'll be charged federally, but I wouldn't put any faith or hope into the Chicago or the Illinois justice system. Unfortunately, I think that's where we're at right now.